Welcome, everyone. I am Adeshawa Josh, and this is Africa Matters. This week, Queen Elizabeth's death has ignited a debate about Britain's colonial legacy in Africa and whether it's time to reshape the relationship with the new monarch. And from waste to wealth, we feature a Nigerian initiative that accepts trash as deposit in exchange for cash in a bank account. And Uganda pays $65 million to the Democratic Republic of the Congo as part of its first installment for war reparations. The death of Queen Elizabeth II has prompted an outpouring of tributes and reflections from around the world. In Africa, the news of her passing has drawn mixed reactions, reigniting the debate about Britain's colonial legacy on the continent. On Twitter, Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo praised her role as the head of the Commonwealth and ordered the British flag to be flown at half-mast across the country for 7 days. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa called the Queen a renowned global figure who lived a remarkable life, while Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari described her as a towering global personality and an outstanding leader. Other Africans also echoed their sentiments.
As much as I may understand that people have different perspectives about it, but I think it's worth the celebration in the midst of all the different perspectives that are existing, because she's been a woman that has led for quite a long time in a world or in a society where we have patriarchy that is dominating. So it's really something that is worth a celebration.
Yeah, I felt sad because regardless of the situation, regardless of whatever surrounds it in the negative way, she's still the head of the Commonwealth, which we belong to, which has given access to Gambians a lot, in any angle you want to mention it.
However, Queen Elizabeth was also the head of the British Empire, which for some Africans carries a legacy of often cruel colonial rule, marked by genocide, slavery, and brutality. Elizabeth became queen while visiting Kenya in 1952. And that same year, the Mau Mau uprising began, which sought to end the British rule in the country. In response, the colonial administration tortured, castrated, and sexually assaulted as many as 150,000 fighters and held them in detention camps. Survivors say it's still difficult to put the atrocities committed by British soldiers behind them.
I myself, as a freedom fighter, I would not celebrate or mourn the death of Queen Elizabeth II. I would mourn the death of the Queen Elizabeth II if she stopped the British people to come here and fight the Mau Mau. Because those people, they took our land.
We will not forget, I personally will not forget that I was incarcerated for 7 years. I cannot forget I was put together with my father. I cannot forget I left my children for 7 years without food, without education. That I will never forget.
Coastal countries like Gambia, Sierra Leone, and Ghana were some of the first nations to fall under British rule. And by the beginning of the First World War in 1914, Britain's control had expanded across the continent to include countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Egypt, and Zimbabwe. The Queen's 70-year reign saw the transition of former colonies into the Commonwealth of Nations, a 56-member alliance that aims to promote trade, democracy, and the rule of law among its members. African countries now make up a third of the Commonwealth. So, how will Queen Elizabeth II be remembered on the continent? And how will that impact Africa's relationship with Britain's new monarch, King Charles III? We're joined by Macharia Munene, an Associate Fellow at the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies and Professor of History and International Relations at the United States International University. He joins me from Nairobi. Thank you so much for making the time. Can the Queen's legacy be separated from the British colonial legacy on the continent?
No, it cannot be separated. It can only be segmented. That her reputation is based on the colonialism. She came to power during the colonial times. She is the last monarch to have had any connections with colonialism in Africa. So she's got that baggage of the colonial supervision, which was very atrocious. Colonialism was slavery in situ. That's one version of it. Then there is that stage where the transition from colonialism to independence and her role, or at least cementing role in creating a feel-good atmosphere between the former colonies and their colonial master, Britain. She is credited with having done her best to smoothen the relationship or the bad feelings at the time of independence. The third element relates to her role as the head of the Commonwealth, the longevity of the Commonwealth, and even the expansion of the Commonwealth to include others that were not British colonies goes to her as credit, because she created an atmosphere where a country like Rwanda or Mozambique, that were never British colonies, could want to be part of it, and they were accommodated into. Some
historians are now calling for a public apology by the British monarchy, perhaps under King Charles III. That might happen, and for reparations for the atrocities committed under British colonial rule. Do you see this happening? Is this likely, and will it be enough?
Well, I don't think it will be enough, but there's a possibility of some reparation of some kind, and maybe find a polite language of saying we are sorry without being so pronounced. The diplomats and the...
Why shouldn't they be so pronounced? Why do you think that the apology should take a very calm tone, the way you have put it?
Well, it's not what I think should be. It's what is likely to be. These are two different things. Charles, as a person, may be inclined to meet the people halfway, especially for sustaining the Commonwealth, that he might want to discuss the matter and then how to go about it. Because, first of all, they have to admit, Britain has to admit the atrocities and take responsibility for it.
Is that likely? Apologize. Do you think that's likely? Because if you do not think that you've done anything wrong, then apologizing would probably be obligatory. It should be a sincere apology. Do you think that's likely to happen?
Yes, it can happen, but there's a lot of work to be done, especially on the part of the Africans, in pushing that agenda to point out with evidence that actually you are guilty of an offense, so that they can see, yes, there is something there. But as long as we're just talking and there is no proper evidence and shaming of itself, then it becomes difficult for the accused person to believe that he's wrong. So the argument, the presentation, the way it is made will count as to whether then the British will feel guilty enough to say, yes, we were wrong. First, we must make the British feel guilty, and then they can apologize. If they don't feel guilty, then they will not apologize.
The Queen was instrumental in establishing the Commonwealth of Nations. What does the future hold for this alliance?
It depends on how Charles conducts himself. And the way the Commonwealth operates, actually it can be credited to India, because it's the one that seemingly brought up the formula.
That's right.
Of being in the Commonwealth without being a British dominion or under the rule of the British. It's the Indians, and then all the others then got into it, and thought it was a good idea. So they thought that the Commonwealth, as an organization, as uniting organization for people who had been under the British rule, it's a good thing. And so they all want to be, and others who are not, then even join in the whole thing. Now, Charles himself has been to Africa many times. He was, actually he represented his mother when Jomo Kenyatta died. So come and, so he knows Africa in many ways. The question that comes in, and he's been known to be concerned with social issues, is he going to push that, or is he amenable to more discussions about not only countries in Africa, but throughout the Commonwealth, as to whether it can be made better than it is? I do not think he would want the empire, the Commonwealth to die, at least not in his watch. He would like to make it bigger. So the chances of it declining is not very high, given that his temperament is to make sure that his mother's legacy succeeds,
right,
and he himself builds on his own legacy as an upright man and somebody who should be admired like his mother.
Thank you so much, Macharia Munene, an Associate Fellow at the Horn International Institute of Strategic Studies and Professor of History and International Relations at the U.S. International University. Thank you for speaking to Africa Matters. Uganda has begun paying its $325 million penalty for invading and looting the Democratic Republic of the Congo at the turn of the century. The International Court of Justice ordered Kampala to pay the reparations in 5 yearly installments beginning this month. But many remain divided on what exactly the country should owe and whether the money will trickle down to them, as Darren Alancheyune reports from the Ugandan capital.
Bat Kakoza is a veteran Ugandan journalist. He has covered major stories, including the Congo War, which began during President Laurent Kabila's reign in 1998. But the Ugandan Army's mission in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo didn't go as planned.
There was a disagreement between Uganda and the DR Congo and Rwandese. So they started fighting each other in Eastern Congo. And as a result, there were so many Rwandese who were killed during that war. So Uganda steps in to try to fight to flush out the ADF rebels, and they found themselves sucked into the war.
The war began in 1998 and officially ended in 2003 when a transitional government took power in the DRC. It involved 9 African countries and 25 armed groups who were pushing for political power and personal gains. And by 2008, about 5 million people died and more than 2 million were left homeless, according to the estimates by the International Rescue Committee. The Congolese government sought $11 billion in compensation for damages from Uganda through the International Court of Justice in 1999. And in 2005, the ICJ ruled that Uganda had violated international law by occupying parts of the eastern DRC and supporting other armed groups during a conflict. 10 years later, the DRC told the court that the talks had stalled. And after 2 decades of failed talks, the UN's highest court in February ruled that Uganda must pay its western neighbor $325 million within 5 years. Uganda this month paid the first installment of $65 million, but this has not impressed the public and some politicians.
It's extremely unfortunate that as a country we're having to carry the cross and pay the sins of individuals. Because, back then we as a country went to Congo, and we said, we are running after some rebels who are destabilizing Uganda and so on. But senior UPDF officers, senior army officers, were engaged in looting. They stole timber, they stole gold and all of that. And eventually Congo took us to court.
In December, Uganda sent at least 1,700 troops to the DRC to help fight a violent rebel group known as the Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF, the largest foreign intervention in the country in over a decade. And some activists are worried.
My fear is that the government will use this money for personal business as it's always done. Our first concern is that this money should first help the victims who've been there for 20 years. For me, the Ugandan army is back on Congolese soil, and it's the same army that made mistakes in Kisangani.
But some political analysts in Uganda say the financial penalty could have been avoided.
Plunder under international law is a very, very, very serious matter. So the price we are paying now of paying $325 million is out partly because of us not being as responsive as we should have been as a country.
Uganda is the only country out of 9 nations that's been ordered to pay for war damages. People here are finding it hard to accept the high price tag at a time when the country's economy is still grappling with huge public debt and COVID-19 disruptions. Darren Alan Cheyune, Africa Matters, Kampala, Central Uganda.
The World Bank says less than half of adults in Nigeria have bank accounts. And at least 64 million people, especially those in rural areas, don't use traditional financial services. But a waste recycler in Abuja has launched an initiative she hopes will change that. Pulom David reports.
This dump site is owned by Olufunso Boniface, the CEO of Chanjadati, which means to transform waste in the Hausa language.
The reasons why I started Chanjadati was to be able to create jobs, but also a platform where people, no matter what your level of education was, whether you had money or not, if you look on the ground and you're walking a mile, you can pick up materials and actually exchange it for cash or incentives. So that was the real push. And then, of course, we wanted to clean up the environment.
More than 500 people bring recyclable materials to various collection hubs across Abuja before they are transported to a larger dump site. Boniface has partnered with one of Abuja's commercial banks to open bank accounts for her workers.
We wanted to create something where we empower these women. But it wasn't enough, like you said, this woman who is just putting her money inside a box that can get stolen. You know, they're not part of the financial ecosystem. They're part of the people that they call the unbanked. So how do we solve this problem with waste, right? That was sort of the question.
Boniface and her team members are making an effort to address causes of financial exclusion like lack of income and economic capabilities, lack of education, and little trust in financial service providers.
So your name is what?
Rifkatu Emmanuel, a widow and mother of 3 children, is part of the more than 400 women who now have bank accounts through this Boniface's initiative. She collects about 40 kilos of recyclable materials weekly and gets paid $5 straight into her bank accounts.
I used to save money.
I used to save money inside bags that I purchased from the roadside. But now I have an account that I am saving my money in. My mind is calm and I am free. The World Bank says the number of Nigerian women with access to bank accounts has increased to 35%, the highest in 10 years. And initiatives like this could help even further.
So with that, I am going to open your account for you.
As well as opening bank accounts for the waste pickers, who are mostly women, they also offer point-of-sale training to help them develop other sources of income. Pulom David, Africa Matters, Abuja.
We head to East Africa next, where water levels in Lake Tanganyika are rising rapidly and affecting the lives of millions of people across Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Tanzania, and Zambia. This year, flooding has displaced thousands of families living along the lake's shores in the DRC. Obeida Hito reports.
One of Central Africa's greatest sources of life now brings destruction. Lake Tanganyika is the second deepest freshwater lake in the world, and it's growing at a frightening pace.
Look, here was a very nice house. Look on the other side. All the people have fled. We don't know where we can get help so that we can rebuild. Look at all this closely. We're living through a nightmare. Tanganyika has destroyed us all.
Local residents depend on fishing and farming to make a living, but torrential rains attributed to global heating have created disastrous conditions.
Tanganyika has destroyed our homes everywhere. Even our port has been destroyed. We're suffering now because trading has become very difficult. Now, we don't know how our lives will be tomorrow.
Residents are pressuring local officials to find rapid solutions. But changes are happening faster than they can respond.
Lake Tanganyika has risen to a level of more or less 5 to 6 meters in height. And in terms of advancing inland, we are now at around 200 to 250 meters in 3 years. In general, this has been caused by climate change, atmospheric disturbance, and problems related to geology.
Congolese officials warn that the situation will get much worse in the next 5 years if no solution is found. Obedehito, Africa Matters.
You're watching Africa Matters, and here's a roundup of other stories making news across the continent. William Ruto has been sworn in as Kenya's 5th president. It started by rolling back some of his predecessors' policies, such as appointing 6 new judges, reverting cargo clearance to the Mombasa port from the inland city of Naivasha, and removing fuel and food subsidies. However, there are concerns that cutting government aid will hit the economy hard as fuel prices are directly linked to the cost of living. Nigeria's National Human Rights Commission says it has paid about $700,000 to compensate victims of police brutality. Authorities have been accused of carrying out extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, illegal arrests, and prolonged detentions. In October 2020, thousands took to the streets as part of nationwide protests against these alleged abuses by the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, better known as SARS. The hashtag #EndSARS went viral, and the Rights Commission says the compensation is a gesture of apology from the government to acknowledge the violations. Welcome back to Africa Matters with me, Adeshoa Josh. Artists have always found inspiration from water. Now some performers in Mali are using the Niger River to bring some magic to local audiences. Taibe Aydin has more.
This is a dance stage with a difference. In Mali's capital Bamako, performers rehearse for a show that hasn't been seen here before.
It's a dream that has come true. It's not just the dance sector, it's not just the artistic sector, but there's a new imagination that is going to land on the river Niger. I have only seen small fishermen's canoes on the river during my childhood, and I think it's more than that.
The floating art venue is called the Pirogue of the Zeme, meaning the wise man's canoe in the local Barbara language. The boat, which is around 20 meters long by 6 meters wide, showcases dance, theatre, puppetry and art exhibitions.
Lassina had this dream of putting a show on the water, and he wanted the people of the banks, the people of the river, to see a show that was performed. I thought it was great, and I said to myself, let's embark on this adventure.
The European Union funded the project that took 4 years to complete. The construction of the boat, salaries for the craftsmen, and funding for performances cost nearly $300,000.
It is a way to show Mali in a different light, and therefore to tell investors, for example, that today Mali is a country where people create, where there is creativity, where you can find motivated young people who want a different Mali.
Artists here hope the movable feast will help Malians preserve their rich and diverse cultures, while also entertaining them. Taiba Aydin, Africa Matters.
And finally, we are staying in Southern Africa, as this week we explore Luderitz, a coastal town on the Atlantic coast of Namibia. It has weathered the frenzy of a diamond rush, with the mining town strictly controlled by the German colonial government until 1990. Let's take a closer look. And that's our show this week. It's been a year since we launched the show, and we would like to thank you, our viewers, and also congratulate my entire team on our 1-year anniversary. Please continue to share your thoughts and suggestions about the stories you've seen on this episode, or ideas on what you would like us to cover on Twitter using the hashtag #AfricaMatters. Feel free to reach out to me on my personal handle @AdeshawaJosh. You can watch this episode and more on YouTube. Just search Africa Matters TRT World. Like, comment, and continue to share. Thanks again for sticking with us in the last 1 year, and I will see you next week.